Well, hey, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Abik. I'm part of the Code42 team. Code42 shares a long, great partnership with Jamf. We've been at JNUC for a number of years now, and so inseparable is our partnership that we, in fact, decided to move into the same building as them on Washington Avenue. So if any of you are ever at the Jamf building, just take an elevator ride 3 floors up, and you'll run into Code42. So we're excited to be here. We have a number of things that we want to talk about today as part of this panel. Our main topic today is insider threat, and specifically insider threat through the lens of departing employees. So we're going to get into that. But I thought it would be a good idea, and I'm certainly going to introduce our esteemed panelists here shortly, but I thought it would be a good idea to kind of level set and set up our discussion for today, right, before we even get into the Q&A round. So just going to move ahead here. So I thought it'd be a good idea, what have my observations been so far? And I know we're only a day into the show, but what have some of my favorite moments been so far? And as one of you, I was actually in the keynote yesterday, kind of standing by the door there, and I was extremely excited to hear the announcement around Jamf Protect. From my perspective, from Code42's perspective as a data security company, security should never be an impediment as to why somebody doesn't embrace a Mac, right? It should be the last reason that we don't have more folks collaborating, sharing, and using the Mac for its true capabilities. So that was a really exciting announcement. I also have another observation. When these terms were used specifically yesterday, I couldn't help but notice the collective applause. Kexless agents, no more kernel panics. I think to everybody else around the world, those terms are pretty alien, but in this room, everybody understands what a kernel panic is. So when those terms were mentioned, it was just fantastic to see everybody's reaction, because I think that's the big reason we're here today, right? I think to a degree, from a security perspective, when Mac is making these exciting updates, we're all thinking about like our third-party software solutions that we have and what the impact is going to be. We're also going to talk a little bit about insider threat today, and I know many of you are probably thinking, oh yeah, that tried and tested topic again, who hasn't heard about insider threat? But you know what's interesting about insider threat is, as much as we choose to ignore the topic, the reality is, and if there's a recent Verizon report on this, that insider threat is actually on the up. In fact, it's grown 50% in the last 4 years alone. And there's a lot of reasons that are contributing to that, and we will get into some of the departing employee scenarios that I mentioned as well. But the insider threat problem is far from solved, and we'll talk about that in the realm of some of our Q&A later today as well. So a few months ago, Code42 actually set out and we did a survey, and we kind of surveyed all customers, and we talked about this idea of, as an employee from a previous job, do you admit to taking data from your previous company to your new job? And interestingly enough, 66% said yes, we admit to taking data from our previous employees. But here's our take on that stat. And I'll tell you why, right? I think anybody in this room can attest to the idea that we've taken data from a previous job. Right? Whether maliciously or non-maliciously, we've all worked on stuff, right? Whether it's source code, whether it's the new product innovation that's been in the works, we've all been guilty of this to some degree. But it is a problem. It is a problem for organizations. Now, for me to come to a tech conference and not use a Star Wars analogy would be wrong. So here it is. Years ago, when this whole insider threat problem was starting to resonate and really, started to make the rounds, there was this nirvana moment in technology, and that nirvana moment was known as data loss prevention, otherwise known as DLP. And at the time, DLP promised much. It was going to block employees from using USB keys. It was going to use these policies that you would have to pretty much spend every day of your lives figuring out and kind of retrofitting to your organization. And then you had this idea of classifying your data, right? What's the most important data? What's less important? And all of these really cool things that were meant to stop insider threat. But then something happened. This. And when you think about DLP, and in fact, I've tried this at this conference. In fact, for the last few years, I've used the word DLP in the same sentence as Mac. and I usually hear some of this. So for many of you in the audience, right, many of you, as these updates are occurring, as Catalina happens, Mojave happens, many of you have the same questions, which is, if I have a DLP, or some other third-party solution for that matter, should I be concerned? Is this going to break something? Do I have to deal with kernel panics? And kind of the last thing I'll mention about insider threat, right? When we think about these Mac updates, insider threat, as I alluded to earlier, is far from an unsolved problem, right? When we read the news today, we read about the Capital Ones. We also read about situations like McAfee, which happens to be in the insider threat throttling business themselves, and they had an unfortunate situation where they were victims of insider threat themselves. So it's a far from unsolved problem, and our goal for today, which kind of leads me to our objectives, is let's deal with this elephant in the room, right? Let's talk about Catalina. Very exciting update, promises much, but for those of you that cheered in the audience yesterday when you heard the terms kexless agent and no more kernel panics, let's dig into what the Catalina update might mean for you. So we'll kind of get into some of that. We'll also talk a lot about security and why security is integral in the world of Mac. But most importantly, this is your session, right? So I certainly have some questions, some handy questions here for both of these gentlemen, but this is your session. So as we're talking, I want you to think about your questions, because in the end, you'll have an opportunity to ask away. And in the end, this was not meant for me to paint a doom and gloom scenario for any of you. I want all of us to walk away from here feeling excited about the Catalina update and essentially feeling more secure. All right, so with that being said, let me introduce you to our panel. So Corey Ranshaw is my partner in crime from Code42. We've worked together for a number of years. Corey has been a senior manager for both the IT and security teams there. So he brings a unique flavor, a unique experience into the mix where he's had the opportunity to work with both IT and security. He's also been involved in our very own Code42 Catalina update. Also Matt Bauer, who's joining us from CrowdStrike. Very excited to have you here. Notice that Matt's title includes the words macOS and kernel. So if there's any dude that you take seriously here about Mac updates, it's this gentleman right here. And they both collectively have 25 years of experience. All right, let's get started, gentlemen. You guys ready?
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So Matt, first question for you. I know that the Catalina update obviously has been huge with the kernel and the kex in general. Can you talk more about what that means for someone who builds and kind of deals with that software on an everyday basis? And overall, what does it mean for security?
Yeah, so I updated my LinkedIn now, so I got to find a new job. No, actually, we're actually pretty excited about it. One of the reasons to get out of the kernel is working there is difficult, and if you don't have experience, you know what happens. You get kernel panics. And unfortunately, too many third parties out there did that. They couldn't write quality code and weren't managing it. And so it makes sense to move. Also, the way the kernel is designed on a Mac, it's got a very strong wall but once you get past that wall, it's wide open versus some of the other OSs, which are segmented. So it makes sense from Apple's security model. They do need to get people out of the kernel. And also allow them to rev the kernel faster without having to work with third parties to make that happen. So we're very excited about what's going to go forward and come forward. Also, there's a number of security changes in the Catalina kernel that are and it's not just Catalina, it's the latest iOSs as well, that have closed up a number of a path for exploits. So we're pretty excited about that. It also means that you're able to develop quicker and faster with things up in user space. Now, we've worked with Apple very hard to create a framework so that we can still do the security that's necessary. And as much as we would like to think kernel panics will go away, when you're working at this level of framework and technology, these things still can happen. So you probably still will get kernel panics every once in a while, unfortunately. But it should be significantly less, but they won't be completely gone.
Sure, thank you. Corey, so you have annoying users like me saying, hey, when are we going to upgrade to Catalina? When are we going to upgrade to Catalina? Can you talk a little bit about the Code42 experience and what that's looked like, within Code42? Sure. Did it break any tools? Yeah. What did it do?
At Code, right, the Catalina rollout is something that we take really seriously. Obviously, being a SaaS company and kind of trying to be on the cutting edge of tech, we're trying to get there as soon as possible. We do have users who are like, hey, I'm going to try and sneak the download in the day it comes out and hammer the refresh button, right? we blocked Catalina with Jamf early on, knowing that we needed to go through and validate things like CrowdStrike, and we used Cisco VPN. So a bunch of different tech that just could break or could not break. And so we did a really extensive trial process of really testing it, doing user testing, grabbing a handful of users inside the company who wanted to raise their hand and deal with whatever may come out with the early upgrades. And we had a lot of problems between agents on endpoints, virtualization software, older software that we still use, but wasn't necessarily updated. And so the process was pretty lengthy, but we're in a good spot now. We're just going through some of the fine touches around tying in the TCC parts of Catalina and all of the pop-ups that kind of come up to make sure we have them fine-tuned as we can so we don't overwhelm the help desk when we kind of unleash the Catalina deployment out on the rest of the company.
Cool, fantastic. So Matt, question for you. So it's been a really exciting time at CrowdStrike. Company went public. I mean, there's just been a really general positive experience around CrowdStrike in general. What has it been like for you personally, working there, recently, and just essentially just making sure that that momentum of growth continues?
I'm not worried about the momentum. I'm most continuing. It's more of sustaining it. No, working there for the time I've been there, a year, it seems like it's every year is like, yeah, it's about 4 years, but it's just very hard. It's the hardest job I've ever had. The problems are incredibly hard. The challenges and the speed at which we have to develop features and functionality is incredibly hard. Your customers are incredibly hard in pushing us constantly. So it's been a real blur. It's a lot of work, lots of hours, and the pressure is intense. When we write software and we write a line of code and we push out there, we know that the job's not done. We're on all your machines. We have more machines than I care to admit. And we have each one of those is important to us. Each one of those has that presentation on it. Each one of those has that last document. Each one of those has the photos or the backups, or it can take down a whole business, or it's your build server. That stuff just, it's not like a daily thing. That's an hourly thing where you're constantly thinking about that and working hard to make that. As far as like the external stuff going public or things like that, that was simply us to ensure and make a guarantee that, CrowdStrike is not going anywhere. We're not looking to be acquired or shut down or anything like that. We are dedicated to security. The company started off with the idea that we were going to do security right, and we're going to actually solve this, and it's a solvable problem, and we have every intent to go out there and to solve it. If you like what you see right now, it's just the beginning. We just had our user conference last week, and the stuff there was stuff that we've been working on previously, and the new stuff that's coming out is fantastic, and I'm very excited about it.
Awesome. So Corey, you have an interesting role, right? Because you have IT and security teams that are both reporting to you. It's always been interesting to me to explore the relationship between IT and security. Let's just say it's not always favorable, and there are different reasons for that. And we'll talk about it specifically from a security perspective, right? There's a security incident, there's an event, security is looking into it, they're leaning on IT. You're almost the bridge between those two teams. So talk a little bit about that and, like typical scenarios that you might see where you have to bring those teams together.
Sure. It's definitely a vision of ours at Code, one being a security company and being a SaaS company, that we're trying to take on the same model that CrowdStrike has, right? Of like security first, drive these features, make real changes in the marketplace. And so the way I see it anyway, and the way the team has been structured, is to really drive forward kind of an evolution of back maybe 10 or 15 years ago, everybody worked in IT and you did security things, and then security kind of got going with some of the things that happened in the marketplace, and then you ended up with a IT and a security team, and then maybe they had different reporting structures. One maybe went to a CFO and one went to some sort of IT department, CIO or something like that. And you got a lot of, I don't want to say animosity, but you got a lot of challenges between priorities, going back and forth between those teams. And where we think we're at Code is really, we don't have a formal IT team anymore. We have a security team that does IT things. And so if you carry that journey forward, we kind of got rid of the IT department and made all of those people security people that do IT functions. And so that's been really the journey that we've been trying to be on as a company as a whole, but we've especially done it with the infrastructure that we run inside the company to take it that way. And it's worked well for us so far. There's lots of examples. Maybe a little bit of a background, a big touch on this. I have infrastructure at Code as a whole, but I also run the security operations team. And so that kind of back and forth bit that used to exist with different leadership changes now stops at me, and I get to figure out the balance of, okay, this issue happened on the security operations side. How do I go back and fix it on the IT side? and the cycle's cut down quite significantly. So when we have things that come up, like we're a CrowdStrike customer, we had the person who does all of our endpoint stuff was like, hey, I saw this at Falcon. I want to look at rolling this out. I messaged the sales guy already, and I already talked to the security ops guys on the team about what the impact of that is. And that cycle is maybe a couple days normally, and now it was like a 15-minute conversation where we got it all done. So the alignment of those two things, I think, is really critical to success. And just an acknowledgement that the fact that IT people have always done security things is hard for people to kind of understand, but it's definitely worked for us.
Matt, same question for you. I'm curious, like at CrowdStrike, just balancing the needs of IT and security. Can you comment on that at all, how that has typically worked?
Yeah, so when we build the product, we see two different customers. There is the IT customers, users, I should say, and there's the security users, and their needs are very different. And so we know that for the most part, it's usually the IT users that are using the product, and the IT admins taking care of it. So if you have installations of, stepping back, there's no security. It doesn't work if the product doesn't work and it doesn't get installed, or IT gets all these complaints and tickets and wants it off the box, or the performance isn't there. So first and foremost, it's got to be a good product and it's got to do it. So we really work hard to try to make sure and take care of the admin side of issues and the IT side of things, because if we can do that, we can make sure that it's on there and we can actually provide the security that's necessary. On the security side, that's a whole different need and a whole different demand. There we're working hard to provide the information that security groups need to figure out nation-state attacks and sophistications. If they're dealing with like 100,000 or couple 100,000 endpoints, they need to be able to see that data, assess it, and work on that and react quickly, somewhat independently of the IT side of the house, right? Because that window needs to shrink as much as possible. So we work very hard to empower the security side. But we definitely see it as two different things. We have features that we build that are dedicated to one group or the others, and that's why we're on the Mac admins channel, right? And we're also in security channels, different Slack groups as well, because it's different users, and both of them need to be satisfied to have a successful product and installation, and for the enterprises to feel comfortable.
And kind of a follow-up to that, I'm sure many here are interested in understanding this as well, but what is CrowdStrike doing specifically to stay kind of on the cutting edge with all of these Mac updates that are happening? How do you ensure that you're ready to go, right?
I run them on my laptop. So I dog food as quickly as we can. Catalina comes out, and we usually have Catalina's a little bit different, but usually when WWDC happens, we're there. We get the build, or the new build, and we usually have our version up and running by the end of the day internally. So we try to move as quickly as we can. And you can do that if you write your code and your software in such a way that Apple signals what they're doing pretty clear if you're paying attention, if you worked it long enough to know where it's going. So you can spend your year getting ready for the next version. So we work very quickly for that. And then we have all of a bunch of systems that are always running the betas, the point release betas as well. And then we dog food very quickly on the Mac team and the engineering. So we're constantly running our latest builds. And then we push them out a little bit more to all of our engineering org. And then we have a number of customers, and I encourage all of our customers to put a pool of machines on some of our early builds as well. And then we slowly keep rolling it out. But we are constantly working on all the latest stuff. And when we get new frameworks or new things like that, we go back and we change that code. So we're pretty merciless when it comes to our code and changing it to making it work going forward.
Awesome. And Corey, what's our process at Code42 when it's time to upgrade?
Yeah. Very similar. We did survey and say like, hey, anybody want to run Catalina, and then roll with it. And then everybody who raised their hand was like, I really want the new dark mode features. You're out. But if you're really interested in like security, which I think a lot of the people are at the company, we took developers and they're like, hey, I know this might break my processes and my development cycle a little bit. They're cool with it. Your leadership's cool with it. Come on aboard. And so we really built a pretty decent base. I think we had like 50 people that we rolled out Catalina to, or let them update purely to poke and play and see what happens. And it's always driven by that curiosity to see how we can make it better, how can we make our product better, what stuff can we do with the new OS 10 features that are out there that are kind of always pushing for the bleeding edge and trying to stay on that. And so it's definitely a good mix of culture of people wanting to be on that, and then us, embracing that and trying to roll forward with it. So that's really been the push, right? Find the people who want to be on it, and then roll it out to them and give it to them as early as possible. And there's no safety in waiting, right? Like figure it out, push ahead, and be there before everybody else does. So.
I have a curiosity question, actually, for both of you. We'll start with you, Matt. Do you actively seek product, third-party product, that you know won't break when Macs, are updating? Is that part of the protocol as you're shopping for, new product solutions in-house? Are you generally looking at those types of things? Like, what won't break if I were to update Mac?
I think, for the most part, most of the stuff we do are our own internal tools. But for the most part, something like that, what I'm looking for is a partner that's strong, right? Like, I want somebody that, if it didn't break in the past, doesn't mean it's not going to break in the future, right? What I need to know is, like, what is the past? So when it does happen, and I'm in a situation, maybe not using the most pleasant of words, you're still going to be on the phone, right? Or you're going to be on a plane coming out here fixing it. Or you're going to tell me, like, truthfully what the situation is, what's wrong, what your estimates are, and you're not going to jerk around with this. That's why this is enterprise software. That's why you pay the money that you pay for it, is because you want to be able to have someone there that's going to tell you what's wrong, what the impact is, how to mitigate it, and what the real solution is. So more than, yes, software that's in the past that hasn't broken is probably a good sign, but if it's never broken, what's going to happen to that company when it does break? How are they going to react? You don't know. And if it's their first time around with that, you may end up with results that you may be doing their IT work and their development work. So finding a partner that's, comfortable with those uncomfortable phone calls is critical.
Corey, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I'd second that, right? I mean, if you look at, Abik talked about Code's use of Jamf. We weave Jamf into a lot of automation in our environment just because we know it works, and we know it works all the time. And it's fantastic, right? Same thing with some of the other tools that we have. We have a reliance on them because we know that they're doing the same things that we're doing, the same things that Jamf is doing, and the same things that CrowdStrike is doing. Getting out in front of things, knowing to look at the things that are important from a Catalina perspective, right? If you're one of those companies that's behind that ball a little bit, we don't want to wait. We want to keep going. And if we have to wait for one tool or one kind of link in the supply chain related to endpoint management, it's not good, right? It slows the whole company down because we really believe that that thing is a critical piece, right? And so we're definitely going to screen for things that don't work well natively to the OS.
Yeah, and Matt, without giving away the secret sauce, what are some of the steps CrowdStrike takes in order to protect data? Like, how are you ensuring that data is protected at all times? Obviously, as you continue to grow, data protection becomes even more important over time. But what are some of the internal steps that you're taking to ensure data protection?
Yeah, as you can imagine, we face a few sophisticated adversaries out there, especially after us directly. And as far as like insider threats and things. So the nice thing is, like, accessing data requires a process, and the CrowdStrike product is very big on monitoring those processes. So what we record is not necessarily the contents of the file as much as we do about the metadata around that file. And if that file is going to be opened or moved or copied or transmitted or something like that, that's all related to a process. And then we record that, so then at a later point in time you can see it, or if it's something that's critical and you say you have a template for that, you can get a trigger for, like, hey, this is being accessed. And the process model is really important, because if you have just a file-only model, it prevents the data exfiltration via, like, DNS, for example, right, which we've seen, right? Like, yeah, you're going to see all these connections, but if I send it out over UDP, you don't see it, and it looks like DNS traffic, and I can hide it. Or if it's like in a air gap situation, someone just takes a picture of it on their phone, right? And then they go home and see it, and you'll never see that. But you will see that that file's been open, that PDF's been open, and then the next one in the directory has been opened, and then the next one. And it's a very interesting pattern, right? So you start seeing things like that. Or situations where maybe it's just an audio signal that's picked up by a computer that's somewhere else, if it's outside a different area. So all those kinds of things. But being able to know, like, the processes and the chain of it, was it an automated script that was run from it, or was it done through the Windows server and they clicked on it to see it? All that kind of stuff is very important. So having the processes, information associated with the file, and that is really critical to knowing what's going to happen, and it catches those very sophisticated ones, not the ones where they're just plugging in a USB and tarring up a whole directory, which is pretty straightforward to catch.
Perfect, thank you.
Which we do see as well.
So, Corey, we've been talking about data protection for a while at Code42. How do we eat our own dog food? how are we protecting data internally?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably obvious we use CrowdStrike internally. But we use them from the external perspective, right, of watching the things that come into our endpoints. As a SaaS company, as a company that's heavily reliant on cloud tech, I used this example one day, and people are like, that's a good idea. We used to build this castle, right? Like you would have this big firewall, and you'd put all your endpoints inside of it, and in some cases, depending on where you worked, you even bolted them or chained them to a desk so nobody could steal them, right? The company is entirely laptop-based. We're probably like 85%, 90% Mac Pros, and very, very, very few desktops, if any at all. And so those endpoints are movable. They leave the office. They go to Germany. They go to the West Coast for sales. I mean, they literally go everywhere with people. And so from an internal process, right, we're using our own tool to really watch some of the behaviors that go on with it and kind of watch our use of the things that are important to us. And so we're definitely kind of fully embracing the fact that users are mobile, data is mobile, cloud is here and here to stay, and mobile device management is really, really important to us. And we're trying to make sure that we weave all of those pieces together to kind of watch what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect. You know, a theme that I've picked up yesterday in particular is this idea of collaboration, and that somehow there's a trade-off between being more secure and allowing your workforce to be productive and collaborative. And I've often kind of likened it to this analogy of a seesaw, right? Like you have security on one side and you have productivity on the other. If you're going to go too heavy on security, well, guess what? You impede your productivity. How do you, and this is a question for both of you, how do you strike that balance, right? Because the users are screaming, we need more collaboration tools, we need to share more, and you're telling me that you have to block me. But where is the balance there, right? Because at the same time, you're tasked with protecting data at the same time, and it's you that the fingers get pointed at if data were to get exfiltrated or leave the building. So how do you strike that balance? I guess I'll start with you, Corey, but I want to hear your thoughts on this too, Matt.
Yeah. I don't know. For code, we don't really push that hard to shut people down from collaboration, right? It's important to us. It allows speed, it allows agility, and it allows movement really quickly. And so if we do things to slow that down, it's my belief that people are just going to find a way around it and use the ways that you don't watch or you don't have visibility into. And so, Matt mentioned we like USB drives as an example. The joke was we brought some of these slides over on a USB today, and the person who did it was like, "Hey, I told the security team I plugged this USB drive into my computer to put this presentation on. Don't get mad." And it's funny because it's just a cultural thing of how we do that, right? But yeah.
For us, we don't. I mean, I don't know about company, but I think me personally, I don't accept that, right? Like, so I don't accept that you have to either be performant and productive or be secure, right? And I think that's pretty easy, right? Then we can self-security and be done, and I don't have to go to work. That'd be great. And I think that's what makes the job so hard, right? Is because we want to have that security, the best security, full security, and still have the full productivity. And that's what you should expect from your security vendors, right? It shouldn't be a compromise. And it's difficult, right? Are we there? No. Or do we work every day to get there? For sure. So, we do that. And then as far as, pushing that, and then collaboration, the other things that sometimes these terms get mixed up a little bit, but like security and risk mitigation, right? So you can do things like, how am I controlling my access to my things like two-factor authentication and different things to reduce the amount of risk, but then you can still have security then on top of that. And sometimes they get mixed up a little bit, but a lot of that control can happen and protection can happen by just mitigating the risk. You don't have everyone access it or controlling access. Controlling access is a big part of it. But then as far as the balancing between the two, we don't. We just think that you should be secure and productive. And if you're not, you should open a ticket and let us know.
Got it. Perfect.
It's definitely why the Catalina upgrade is worthy of doing, right? I mean, the fact that they're rolling so many new things into there, is it a change? Yes. Is it a departure from what you used to do? For sure. Is it overall a huge benefit and a plus to the company? 100%. And it's for that reason, be secure, go fast, partner and collaborate, and do all the stuff that you need to do. Yeah.
Perfect. So I have one last question, and then this is going to be your session, right? Because I really want everybody to have an opportunity to ask questions they have. But for my last question, I want each of you to look this Mac/IT/security crowd in the eye and tell them, give them some parting thoughts, if you will, around things they should be aware of as they consider upgrading to Catalina from a security perspective. So, Corey, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Do it though, right? It seems obvious, but it's really important to stay up to date with things from a whole number of reasons, right? But the upgrade brings so many things to the environment, and staying current is really important. The users are pushing for it, and we know that they're going to try and push for those things anyway. But find the tools, find the time, find the ways around it, train users, train the support organizations, and really push to get the upgrade done.
Matt.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm definitely a fan of moving to Catalina, especially for some of the kernel security changes that they made. Definitely will reduce the opportunities for adversaries to get into the machines. And then I think an interesting thing is, that, especially with Catalina, you know, I say this as a vendor, we really need tickets, and more so than other releases from you, in features and your pain points. I assure you, all of your environments are unique, and you are very much snowflakes. We see this all the time in the tickets, and so some of the scenarios that we test with, and they grow because of the tickets that come in, we don't know until we get a ticket from you. So we, you know, I would say do your vendors a favor and make a lot more tickets for Catalina, so we can help them out, which will help you out. We definitely need that input more with this release than we have seen with other releases, especially with, you know, the privacy settings and things like that are coming out. It'll be, you know, separate from that. The privacy settings, it'll be important to figure out some policies and how to manage that with users, so they don't just click on everything and we get into the situation where they just accept everything. That's an open problem, I would say, right now, and I think there are tools that are necessary to figure out that. So I would imagine more TCC database auditing and things like that to manage. But do your vendors a favor and open tickets, please.
And second that.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's open it up for questions. And I believe that there are mics situated in each aisle there. But yes, anybody have any questions, please come forward.
We'll take complaints, too.
We'll take complaints as well. Or if anybody wants to talk about their personal experiences with Catalina, we'll take that as well. But let us know what you're thinking. All right, in the meantime, I guess I'll ask you a quick question as well. As if anybody else wants to interject with a question, feel free to do so. But this concern around Catalina, this concern around kernel updates, does this, I'm looking for some thoughts on this, right? Is this signaling Apple kind of closing the doors down on vendors that rely on those kernel extensions? I mean, if you're a security company that has relied typically on those kernel extensions for your solution, does this signal potentially the closing down of some of that? Is Apple tightening up, you know,
I don't know
that
if they're
experience?
signaling it as much as that it is. Like, I would be surprised if the next version of the OS would, the next version of the OS, I would imagine, would still let you have kernel extensions, but it may require you to boot into recovery mode, making a SIP preference change and something like that. But it's not going to be something that you're going to be able to use an MDM solution to whitelist or something. So I would expect kernel extensions to be gone. They with driver kit, they've pretty much covered all the scenarios. They have file systems left to go, but file systems are horrible. That's challenging to do, and they do have in place and working for, like, you know, third-party like cards and things like that, especially with the Mac Pro, right? So a lot of those PCIe cards are going to require what would typically be a kernel extension, and they definitely have solutions that they're working on right now for that as well. So I think the next version of the OS will still support kernel extensions, but not in a way that would be usable in an enterprise, let's say. And then the subsequent one after that, I think they're gone.
Perfect. So Corey, kind of a different question for you. We know the stats on insider threat. It's a problem that's only getting worse. Other than renewing Mr. Robot for another season, what else can happen to really help drive home this point that insider threat programs are an actual necessity for companies?
Right. Well, I mean, if you watch the news, right, there's tons of companies out there. We mentioned McAfee and some other ones that have really had threats with employees that left the company. If you're in the education space, that might be different. That might be the view of, you know, we're doing really important research as an education institute, and we really need to make sure that it stays put. It's really important to the success of the university and some of the programs and funding associated with those. And so really finding out what data is out there and trying to figure out how to protect that data from leaving is important, right? We have built a pretty decent program around that, specifically related to risks and the things that we see, and we've built tools that compensate those or try to mitigate those risks as much as possible. So, yeah.
Fantastic. All right, anybody, any questions? So I know that a lot of us are shy. Believe it or not, I'm a very shy person myself, but I was voluntold that I get to do this, so here I am. However, I do want to say that we both CrowdStrike and Code42, we have a booth in the kind of the trade show area there. So please come and talk to us. We'd love to answer any additional questions you have. I want to thank Matt and Corey for joining me up on stage here today. And oh, there is a question. Fantastic.
Hello. Actually, this is maybe a little more broader than just the data issue, but are you finding it challenging or easier now that the OS is changing the structure about what's readable, what's writable?
I think it's probably a little bit easier, and it's easier depending on the way you're thinking. It's easier because certain activities that are happening on those read-only volumes are very much a detection, right? It's, you know, you shouldn't have your shell like under your user writing to those files. So if we see that, we detect it right away. Not a whole lot changes because if you still crack the file, crack the kernel doesn't care about what's readable and what's read-only. So we still have to do all those checks and make sure that things are happening. And it's a great place for persistence because users just can't go and delete it. So like threats can sit there and be persistent, and so maybe automated tools wouldn't be checking there. So I would say it's a little bit easier, but that doesn't negate us always having to do the same work that we had been doing. It just makes the detection a lot more confident.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. The other thing is, I mentioned like the users that click the OK button to every single like pop-up that comes up on TCC. That can cause like a negative security culture as well. So related to the user behavior on the endpoint, the tools get easier to detect some things, but it also, the fear is if you don't transition well through that, you're going to end up with users who are doing things that they wouldn't have otherwise done because they had to click this box, or maybe they put the file in a different directory because they hit deny and don't know how to hit allow later on. I mean, there's some like weird things that come up that are just user education problems and training and awareness more than they are anything related to the operating system. But I would agree. I think it's definitely going to be easier long term once we kind of get familiar with how Catalina is really doing things and where the journey goes from like 10.16 and some of the other updates that come out.
Yeah, more interesting problem sometimes too is you could do some stuff with snapshots to confuse security software. You can be pretty creative, and so if you're a security vendor, you got to be kind of aware of some of these tricks and things like that because you can look like you're at a different point in time, and you can't use modification dates per se, and it's a lot of fun stuff with that. But APFS has definitely done some changes. Actually, APFS has been interesting for a number of different reasons than HFS, but so yeah, it's always changing. So if it's not that, it'll be something else next week. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Going once? Twice. All right, well, thank you all for attending our session today. Again, thank you to both of you for being up here. And then come and visit us if you have any additional questions. We both are out there ready and willing to answer any additional questions. So thank you, everybody. Have a great morning. Have a great
Thank
event.
you.